The vanishing. The stars were dying one by one as the Kryvax Imperium ships methodically extinguished them. Not literally, of course, but that's how it felt to Captain Elena Reyes as she watched another human outpost collapse under enemy fire. From the command deck of the ESV Horizon, the flagship of humanity's last defense fleet, she witnessed the end of humanity's brief golden age of space exploration. Outpost Sigma has fallen. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Jackson reported, his voice hollow. Casualty reports are still coming in. Elena's fists clenched at her sides. This was the fourth outpost lost this month. Earth's colonies were falling like dominoes, and the Kryvax showed no mercy to civilians. How many ships do we have left, XO? She asked, though she already knew the answer. 27 combat-ready vessels, Captain. The Artemis and Poseidon sustained heavy damage, but can still fight. That's all that remains of the Earth space vessel fleet. 27 ships against an armada of thousands. The mathematics of defeat were simple. 6 months ago, the Kryvax Imperium had appeared at the edges of human space with a single demand: immediate and unconditional surrender. Humanity, having only recently united under the United Earth Alliance after centuries of internal conflict, had refused. They had not spent generations building a space fleet and establishing colonies on distant worlds only to bow to the first alien threat they encountered. But the Kryvax were not the first alien civilization humans had met. They were simply the first hostile one. For decades, humanity had enjoyed peaceful relations with other species, engaged in trade, and learned from more advanced civilizations. The Kryvax, however, were conquerors, a species that viewed all others as either subjects or obstacles. Captain called Dr. Aisha Chen, the fleet's lead scientist. Project Alcubierre is ready for field testing. Elena turned to face the scientist. Dr. Chen's eyes were rimmed with red from lack of sleep, her normally immaculate lab coat stained with coffee. For the past 3 months, she had led a team working around the clock to complete humanity's last hope. "You're certain it's ready?" Elena asked. The simulations show an 89% chance of success. Dr. Chen interrupted. "Higher than our previous estimates. But Captain, we haven't been able to test the return protocols under combat conditions." The Alcubierre drive, named after the 20th century physicist who first theorized it, was humanity's attempt to create true faster-than-light travel by warping space-time around a vessel. Previous FTL methods used by humans and other species relied on stable wormholes or jump gates. The Alcubierre drive would allow ships to create their own warps in space-time, potentially revolutionizing space travel. If it worked. General Williams is on Secure Channel 1. Captain, Communications Officer Park announced. Priority Alpha. Elena nodded and moved to her private communications booth. The weathered face of General Maya Williams, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces, appeared on the screen. "Captain Rice, I've reviewed Dr. Chen's latest reports," Williams said without preamble. "The Defense Council has made its decision." Elena felt her heart rate increase. "And you are to proceed with Operation Lazarus immediately. Equip all remaining vessels with the Alcubierre drive prototypes and prepare for simultaneous activation." Elena inhaled sharply. "General, with respect, we haven't tested the drive in a coordinated fleet action. The interference pattern's cold." "We're out of options, Captain," Williams cut her off. "The Kryvax main fleet will reach Earth in 72 hours. Their Pathfinder ships are already engaging our lunar defenses. If Project Alcubierre doesn't work, we lose everything anyway." Elena knew the general was right. With their remaining conventional forces, they could mount only a symbolic defense of Earth. Billions would die. "Understood, General. We'll begin preparations immediately." Williams' expression softened slightly. "Elena, this is our Hail Mary. Make it count." The transmission ended. 6 hours later, the remnants of humanity's fleet had been fitted with the experimental drive systems. Every available engineer and scientist had been pulled from their regular duties to assist with the installation, working with a desperation born of impending doom. On the command deck of the Horizon, Elena addressed her crew and, by extension, the crews of all 27 ships. Men and women of the Earth Defense Fleet, today we attempt something no human has done before. Our mission is simple but vital. We will use the Alcubierre drive to bypass the Krivax blockade, appear directly within their command structure, and deliver a targeted strike at their leadership. She paused, looking at the determined faces around her. I won't lie to you. This technology is experimental. The risks are enormous, but the alternative is the subjugation of Earth and all her colonies. The Krivax do not take prisoners. They take slaves. Today, we prove that humans will never be enslaved. A solemn silence fell over the command deck. These were professional soldiers, men and women who understood the stakes. Many had already lost family members in the Krivax's advance. Dr. Chen, Elena said, turning to the scientist who now stood at an auxiliary console. Begin the countdown sequence. Dr. Chen nodded and initiated the startup protocols. Throughout the fleet, the experimental drives began to hum with energy, creating invisible distortions in space-time around each vessel. All ships reporting ready, Captain, Lieutenant Commander Jackson announced. Drive cores at 95% synchronization and rising. Elena took her command chair and opened a channel to the fleet. All vessels, this is Captain Reyes. On my mark, activate your Alcubierre drives with the coordinates locked for the Krivax command ship. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Throughout the fleet, officers pressed their activation keys. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a strange distortion appeared around each ship, as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched like rubber. Drive activation successful, Dr. Chen reported, her voice tight with tension. Space-time distortion forming around the fleet. We're approaching the translation point. On the main view screen, the stars began to smear, stretching into long lines of light as space-time itself bent around the fleet. The humming of the drive grew louder, and a strange pressure built in the ears of everyone aboard. Then warning klaxons began to blare. Interference patterns detected between ships. Dr. Chen shouted over the noise. The warp fields are interfering with each other, creating a cascade effect. Elena gripped the arms of her command chair. Can we abort? Too late. We're committed. Dr. Chen's fingers flew over her console. The distortion is growing. It's pulling in all 27 ships. The view screen showed a terrifying sight. Instead of individual warp bubbles around each ship, a massive swirling vortex of distorted space-time had formed, engulfing the entire fleet. The stars were no longer visible, replaced by a chaotic swirl of light and darkness. Structural integrity holding, Jackson reported, though strain showed in his voice. But the drive is pulling more power than predicted. We're past the safety limits. Elena opened her mouth to give an order, but before she could speak, a blinding flash of light filled the command deck. For a split second, Elena felt as though her body was being pulled in every direction at once, stretched into infinity while simultaneously compressed into a single point. Then, darkness. When Elena regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the silence. The constant background hum of the ship's systems, so familiar she usually didn't even notice it, was gone. Status report, she croaked, pulling herself up from the deck where she had fallen. Around her, the crew was slowly recovering, checking systems, and helping injured comrades. Main power offline, Jackson reported, his face illuminated only by emergency lighting. Auxiliary systems functioning at minimal capacity. Communications, weapons, and propulsion are all down. The rest of the fleet? Elena asked. All ships appear to be intact, Captain, Lieutenant Park said from the communication station. We're receiving limited transmissions via emergency channels. They're reporting similar conditions, minimal power, systems offline. Dr. Chen, what happened? Elena turned to the scientist, who was staring at her console in disbelief. The interference between the warp fields. It created a singularity of sorts, she said slowly. But instead of destroying us, it seems to have transported the entire fleet. Somewhere. Where are we? Elena demanded. Jackson looked up from the navigation console, his face pale in the dim light. Unknown, Captain. Stellar cartography is offline, but the stars are wrong. Elena moved to the viewport and looked out at the void. Jackson was right. The familiar constellations were gone, replaced by an alien sky, but something else caught her attention. In the distance, massive structures floated in space, geometric shapes of impossible size that seemed to glow with internal light. Are those artificial structures? She whispered. They appear to be, Dr. Chen confirmed, joining her at the viewport. And they're unlike anything built by the Kryvax or any other known species. As the fleet drifted in this unknown region of space, emergency systems slowly bringing key functions back online, Elena realized the terrible truth. Operation Lazarus had failed. They had not appeared near the Kryvax command ship. They had not struck a decisive blow for humanity. Instead, they had vanished from known space entirely, leaving Earth defenseless against the coming invasion. Back in the Sol system, the Kryvax watched in confusion as the human fleet disappeared in a flash of exotic radiation. Their sensors recorded the event, but their scientists could not explain it. To them, it appeared as though the humans had destroyed themselves in a final desperate act. The Kryvax Imperium High Command laughed at what they perceived as human cowardice, the flight of their military rather than facing honorable defeat. 3 days later, when the main Kryvax fleet arrived at Earth, they found a planet with significant military capabilities, but no interstellar fleet to defend it. The war for Earth began in earnest, with the Kryvax expecting a swift victory now that humanity's space forces had apparently fled. They had no way of knowing that Captain Reyes and her fleet had not fled, but rather had been catapulted into a distant region of space, or perhaps beyond space itself, where they would encounter technologies and truths that would transform them in ways no human had ever imagined. And they certainly could not have predicted that one day these same humans would return. The return. 30 years passed on Earth. The Kryvax conquest had been brutal, but not as complete as they had hoped. Humans, it turned out, were remarkably stubborn and inventive even in defeat. While the major cities and strategic locations had fallen within months, guerrilla resistance continued in remote areas. The Kryvax maintained control through orbital bombardment platforms and garrisons in major population centers, but they never achieved the total subjugation they desired. Human civilization continued, diminished but not destroyed, under alien rule. The Kryvax extracted Earth's resources and conscripted its people for labor, but they found humans to be troublesome subjects, prone to sabotage, escape attempts, and small but persistent acts of defiance. Marcus Chen, son of the long-presumed dead Dr. Aisha Chen, worked as a technician in a Kryvax communications facility near what had once been Buenos Aires. Like many humans with technical skills, he was valuable enough to be given certain privileges, better food, private quarters, even limited freedom of movement within the facility, but was still fundamentally a slave. Chen, get in here, barked Overseer Krath, a mid-ranking Kryvax official. The long-range scanners are showing anomalies again. Marcus hurried into the monitoring station, careful to keep his eyes lowered as was expected of human workers. What kind of anomalies, Overseer? Kraft gestured to the display with one of his 4 upper limbs. These energy readings at the edge of the system. They've been appearing intermittently for the past 3 days. The automated systems categorize them as sensor ghosts, but they're too persistent. Marcus studied the readouts, keeping his face carefully neutral despite the surge of excitement he felt. The energy patterns were unmistakable to someone who had grown up studying his mother's research. Space-time distortions consistent with theoretical Alcubierre drive signatures. Likely cosmic ray interference. Overseer, he said calmly. These older scanner arrays often misinterpret charged particle events. Kraft made a clicking sound of annoyance. Fix it. I don't want false reports cluttering the system. Yes, Overseer. I'll recalibrate immediately. Marcus bowed and moved to a workstation, his mind racing. As soon as Kraft left the room, Marcus extracted a small data device from beneath his uniform and downloaded the anomaly readings. This had to reach the resistance. 3 days later, the anomalies became impossible to hide or explain away. Massive distortions appeared at the edge of the solar system, visible to even the most basic astronomical equipment. The Kryvax High Command on Earth ordered their defense fleet to full alert, fearing an attack from one of their rival empires. What emerged from the distortions, however, was something no one had expected. 27 ships appeared in formation, human vessels bearing the markings of the long-vanished Earth defense fleet. But they were transformed. The ships' hulls now incorporated strange, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Energy readings from the vessels defied conventional analysis. In orbit around Earth, aboard the Kryvax command carrier, High Commander Vexnar watched in disbelief as the human fleet approached at impossible speeds, bypassing defensive positions as if they weren't there. Open communications, he ordered. All frequencies. On the main display, a human face appeared. A woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, her eyes reflecting a depth of experience that seemed impossible for such a short-lived species. "This is Captain Elena Reyes of the Earth space vessel Horizon," she said, her voice strong and clear. "We have returned." Vexnar contained his shock behind a mask of Kryvax military discipline. "Captain Reyes," he replied, "your fleet disappeared 30 years ago. The humans of Earth are now subjects of the Kryvax Imperium by right of conquest. If you have indeed returned, you will surrender your vessels immediately or be destroyed." Elena smiled, and there was something in that smile that unsettled the Kryvax commander deeply. "High Commander, we did not return to surrender. We returned to free our people and to deliver a message to the galaxy. Humanity will no longer be underestimated." Before Vexnar could respond, alarms blared throughout his ship, multiple energy spikes from the human vessels. His tactical officer reported, "They're deploying some kind of... I don't know what these are." From the human ships emerged strange, shimmering constructs, not solid vessels or conventional weapons, but what appeared to be localized distortions in space-time itself, controlled and directed with precision. "All vessels, open fire," Vexnar commanded. The Kryvax fleet launched a barrage of plasma torpedoes and energy beams at the human ships, but the weapons seemed to pass through the vessels without effect, as though they were firing at ghosts. On Earth, Marcus Chen was among the first to witness the return. He had managed to access a secure observation deck in the communications facility, watching in awe as the battle unfolded in orbit. The Kryvax ships fired desperately at the human fleet, but their weapons found no purchase. It was as though the returning humans existed partly in another dimension, untouchable by conventional means. Then the human fleet responded, not with traditional weapons, but with precisely calculated space-time manipulations that caused Kryvax ships to become entrapped in localized fields where time itself moved differently. Some vessels appeared frozen in space, others aged centuries in moments, their hulls deteriorating into dust. Within an hour, the Kryvax Orbital Defense Force had been neutralized without a single human ship firing a conventional weapon. From his observation post, Marcus watched as smaller craft departed from the human fleet, heading toward major Kryvax installations on Earth. The liberators had arrived. In the Buenos Aires facility, chaos erupted as the Kryvax commanders received reports of simultaneous attacks on all their major strongholds. Marcus used the confusion to access the central communications array, broadcasting a message to all resistance cells. "The fleet has returned. Liberation is underway. Execute Contingency Phoenix." Across Earth, hidden resistance fighters launched coordinated strikes against Kryvax ground forces who suddenly found themselves without orbital support. The invaders, never fully comfortable on Earth's higher gravity, were now isolated and vulnerable. In orbit, Captain Alina Reyes transferred from the horizon to a smaller craft and descended to what had once been the United Earth Alliance headquarters in Geneva. The building now served as the primary Kryvax administrative center for Earth governance. She walked through the corridors, flanked by two officers who, like her, had been transformed by their 30-year journey. Kryvax security forces raised their weapons but found themselves unable to fire. Some invisible force held them immobile. In the Central Council chamber, Alina confronted Governor Zoltar, the highest-ranking Kryvax official on Earth. "How?" the governor demanded, his voice thick with rage and fear. "How have you done this? Where did your fleet go?" Alina regarded him calmly. 30 years ago by your time, our experimental drive malfunctioned. Instead of taking us to the Kryvax command ship as planned, it sent us beyond the boundaries of conventional space, to a region where different physical laws apply. She approached a window, looking out at the city where humans and Kryvax were watching the sky in disbelief. "We encountered entities there, beings of pure intelligence who exist in dimensions beyond our comprehension. They had been observing our universe for billions of years. To them, the rise and fall of entire galactic civilizations is but a moment. These beings, they altered you?" Zoltar asked, his military training reasserting itself as he sought to understand the tactical situation. "They taught us," Alina corrected. "They showed us how reality itself can be manipulated by sufficiently advanced intelligence. For them, time is not linear, and space is not fixed. What you see as technology in our ships is actually a fundamental reimagining of how we interact with the universe." She turned back to the governor. "By their time scale, we spent millions of years learning. For us, it felt like decades. And now we've returned to liberate our homeworld." Across Earth, similar scenes played out as the returned humans systematically dismantled Kryvax control. They did not kill when it could be avoided. Instead, they simply rendered Kryvax technology inoperable and their weapons useless, containing rather than destroying. 3 days after the fleet's return, the last Kryvax stronghold surrendered. The occupation of Earth was over. In Geneva, now the center of Earth's restoration, Alina Reyes met with Marcus Chen, who had emerged as one of the Resistance's key leaders. "You're her son," Alina said, studying his face and seeing echoes of Aisha Chen. "Your mother would be proud." Marcus swallowed hard. "Is she?" "She's alive," Alina confirmed, "but changed, like all of us. She's remained on the horizon to monitor the space-time boundaries. She asked me to give you this." She handed him a small device that seemed to shimmer slightly, as though not entirely present in normal space. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, holding the device carefully. "The Kryvax will return with a larger force. They control dozens of systems." Alina smiled that same unsettling smile that had disturbed High Commander Vexnar. "No, they won't. Even as we speak, similar liberations are occurring on every world the Kryvax conquered. Their empire is being dismantled simultaneously across thousands of light years." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "How is that possible? Even with your new technologies, you can't be everywhere at once." "Time is not what you think it is," Alina said simply. "Neither is space. The beings we encountered exist in all moments simultaneously. They helped us understand that what seems like a limitation to three-dimensional thinking is merely a perspective problem." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Humanity won't just reclaim its freedom, Marcus. We're going to help guide all sentient species toward a new understanding of reality. The age of conquest is ending. Something far more interesting is beginning." Above Earth, the transformed fleet maintained its vigil, its ships partially phased into dimensions beyond human perception. They were no longer merely vessels of war, but embodiments of a new paradigm. Proof that humanity, when pushed to its limits, could transcend those limits entirely. The Kryvax had laughed when the human fleet vanished, seeing it as cowardice. They begged for mercy when that same fleet returned, changed beyond recognition by forces they could never comprehend. And throughout the galaxy, the message spread: underestimate humans at your peril. They may seem primitive, they may seem weak, but they adapt. They learn. They return. And when they do, the rules of the game will never be the same again. The end.